Ever had a party guest that made your skin crawl without saying a word? Tonight, we're stepping into real-life New Year's celebrations that turned unexpectedly terrifying. Imagine laughter and music, and then someone shows up who doesn't belong. Someone who makes the whole room feel wrong. Stay with me, because these true encounters will make you question who you really invite into your home. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe, hit like, share this with anyone who loves a good scare, and tell me where you're watching from. Now, let's dive in. It was just past midnight when I noticed him, leaning in that impossible way against the far wall of my living room, as if he had always been part of the structure itself. The party was in full swing. Laughter ricocheted off the high ceilings. Champagne corks popped like distant fireworks, and someone had started singing off-key, but his presence cut through it all like a shadow in sunlight. I froze for a second, unsure if I should call it out, because no one else seemed to notice him. He didn't belong. No one knew who he was, and yet there he was, moving with a strange ease through the crowd, weaving between the bodies like he belonged in a story no one had read. It made me uneasy in a way I couldn't name at first, that prickling, instinctive dread you get when something is just a little off, but everyone else is too busy to notice. I tried to focus on the party, to laugh at the jokes and raise my glass with everyone else, but the corners of my vision betrayed me. He was always there, half hidden, a dark smudge at the edge of celebration. I caught glimpses of him staring at me with that faint, crooked smile that didn't reach his eyes. It wasn't angry, exactly. It wasn't mocking either, though it had a sharpness to it like the world was a private joke I wasn't in on. I waved, tried to get someone's attention, leaned toward a friend to whisper, "Do you see him?" But the noise swallowed my words, and when I turned back, he was still there, just the same. Still watching, patient and still, as if he had paused time around him. I remember feeling a tug in my chest, a coil of unease tightening, and for the first time that night, the warmth of the living room didn't reach me. I watched him move. He didn't speak to anyone, didn't laugh, didn't raise a glass. He just floated, silently, almost gliding from corner to corner, and every time our eyes met, I felt it. The faintest nudge of recognition, though I couldn't place him. There was something deeply familiar about him, like a memory you can almost touch, but that slips away when you try. My friends didn't notice him. They laughed, they danced. They didn't see the way he seemed to watch the edges of the room, mapping it as if he owned every inch of it. As the countdown began, everyone grabbed hands, eyes bright and hopeful. 10, 9, 8. I kept my eyes on him. He hadn't moved. 7, 6, 5. And then I realized he was smiling wider, a grin that looked almost cruel, though it was subtle. Like a shadow of cruelty pressed lightly onto a canvas. 4, 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year. Everyone cheered, hugging, kissing, shouting. I turned toward him instinctively, hoping he would disappear with the confetti and noise. But he clapped, quietly, soft, deliberate, almost mockingly. My stomach sank. The sound didn't belong. I felt it in my bones, an echo that didn't match the energy around me. And then he was gone. I don't mean he left the room. I mean he vanished. 1 second he was leaning casually against the wall, and the next there was nothing there but empty space and the faint, lingering echo of that grin. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, convinced I'd imagined it, but the cold twist of dread in my chest told me I hadn't. I whispered to the people around me, asking, "Did anyone see that man?" But they shook their heads. "What man?" someone asked, smiling. "There's no one here but us." I tried to brush it off as stress, the kind of tension that sneaks in during holidays, the kind of fatigue that makes you see faces in shadows. But over the next few days, I couldn't shake it. Every reflection in glass, every corner of every room, I half expected him to be there. I replayed the party in my mind endlessly, trying to find a logical explanation, a face I'd mistaken, someone I didn't know wearing a borrowed suit. But no one remembered him. Not a single person. My friends laughed it off when I pressed it. "Maybe you were just tired," they said. "Or maybe too much champagne." Weeks later, the unease had grown into something heavier. I walked past the living room where the party had been held, and for a fleeting second, I thought I saw him leaning there again, as if the walls had absorbed him somehow. My hands shook, and I realized I hadn't been able to sleep properly since that night. Every creak of the house, every brush of wind against the window made me start. I stopped inviting friends over, stopped holding parties. The laughter, the noise, it had become unbearable, because I knew he could come back. Not for them, never for anyone else, but for me. One night, I woke to the sound of soft clapping. I thought I must be dreaming, but the sound persisted, echoing across the walls of my apartment. I switched on the lights, tore through every room, but nothing was there. Just my own shaking hands, my heart hammering against my ribs, and the eerie emptiness that seemed suddenly suffocating. That quiet applause was his signature, I realized. Not loud, not threatening, but intimate. Personal. It wasn't for the party, not for the celebration, it was just for me. I started noticing other things, subtle signs that made my skin crawl, the smell of smoke when no fire burned, a footprint in dust I'd cleaned the day before, a shadow crossing the doorway when I knew I was alone, and always that faint grin in my mind's eye. I tried to tell myself it was paranoia, a trick of my imagination, the residue of a night that had been loud, confusing and disorienting, but deep down I knew better. I could feel the wrongness of it, the unnatural patience, the sense that someone could exist in your life without ever entering it fully and still know every corner, every sound, every heartbeat. Months passed. Life went on in a fragile, tense sort of way. Friends drifted away. The city felt smaller, the nights longer. Every darkened alley and forested park more oppressive than before. I never saw him again in the same way, leaning in that corner, unclothed by normal reality, but I would catch glimpses of movement in the corner of my vision, shadows where there should be none. My reflection sometimes seemed off, a little too still, a little too knowing. And always the faint echo of quiet clapping, as though he were applauding my terror, my uncertainty, the fact that he had found a way to linger in my life without ever truly being there. The thing that terrifies me most, though, isn't the clapping or the vanishing or the way he moved through the crowd unseen. It's the knowledge that he existed at all, that I wasn't imagining it, that I was the only one who could feel it. Everyone else had forgotten him immediately, as if he were a specter designed to haunt a single person. And the more I think about it, the more I realize that's what he wants. He doesn't belong to the party. He doesn't belong to anyone else. He only belongs to that moment of recognition, that fleeting, suffocating sense of being watched, of being understood in a way that is not comforting. Sometimes, late at night, I sit in the dark, listening to the faint hum of the city outside, and I swear I hear it again, the quiet, measured clapping just out of reach. My heart hammers, my hands go cold, and I feel it, the weight of being seen by something that no one else can perceive, something that isn't part of our world, and yet touches it just enough to remind me I'm never truly alone. I don't know why he came to that party, or why he left, or why he chose to linger in my mind when no one else remembered him. But I know this: I will never forget him, and I don't think I'm meant to. Even now, years later, the memory lingers, a thin, cold thread tying me to a night that should have been nothing more than celebration and laughter. I can't explain it. I can't rationalize it, and I can't make anyone else see it. But I know he was there, and I know I'm still marked by it, waiting for the day, if it ever comes, when that faint, impossible grin will return, leaning in the corner and clapping quietly, just for me. I remember the night clearly, though every detail feels like it's been smudged at the edges, like a memory caught in smoke. The party was in full swing, a jumble of laughter, music, and the sticky mess of spilled drinks and confetti covering the hardwood floor. People were crowding the small living room, leaning over one another, shouting to be heard over the speakers. I had just arrived, carrying a bottle, when I thought I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, a shadow slipping behind the curtains near the back window. I turned sharply, expecting to see a friend, someone playing a joke, but there was nothing. Just the swaying folds of fabric and the dim glow of the streetlight outside. I laughed it off to myself, thinking the wine in my hand had finally caught up to me, and turned back to the crowd. At first, everything was normal enough. Music pounding, people talking over it, the smell of cheap beer and sweat thick in the air. But then I started noticing small things that didn't make sense. My coat was gone, just gone, even though I could swear I'd hung it on the chair by the door. Later, I noticed my gloves missing. My phone, which I'd left on the edge of the kitchen counter, wasn't there either. At first, I chalked it up to the chaos, the crowd, someone borrowing things absent-mindedly. But the feeling didn't leave me. There was a tightness in my chest, a subtle pressure that crawled over my skin whenever I glanced toward the windows or the corners of the rooms that the light didn't quite reach. Then the whispers started. Not the normal chatter of drunk friends leaning in close to speak over the music. These were quiet, almost imperceptible murmurs that didn't match any voice I recognized. One by one, I realized others were noticing too. Chairs would tilt slightly, not enough to fall, just enough to make you think you'd imagined it. The stereo would skip, cutting off mid-song only to start a different track entirely. I told myself it was the speaker, the old wiring, some mundane explanation that made sense. But there was always the windows. The air near them was colder, like the forest outside had crept inside and settled in the corners, and every time someone passed them, their expression would shift ever so slightly, a flicker of unease, like they knew something I didn't. By the time midnight rolled around, the crowd had thinned. People stepped outside for cigarettes, left to crash in their cars, and the noise of the party dimmed to a low hum of conversation. I found myself alone in the kitchen, trying to rationalize what I was feeling. Then I saw it, or thought I did, a shape in the living room again, just beyond the reach of the light from the ceiling fixture. It wasn't fully formed, not like a person, more like the suggestion of one. A ripple across the floor, a shadow that didn't match anything I could identify. I froze. My heart started hammering, the wine and music fading into the background, leaving only that tight, prickling fear along my spine. I tried to laugh it off, told myself I was imagining things, and went to grab my coat. But when I went to the chair where it should have been, there was nothing. My gloves, my phone, and now my coat. All gone. The whispers grew louder, or maybe I just noticed them now. Low murmurs drifting around the edges of my hearing. I could feel eyes on me, but there was no one there. I remember stepping backward toward the front door, tripping over a fallen chair and freezing when I realized the front windows were open just a crack. The cold air of the night drifted in, carrying the smell of wet leaves and something else I couldn't name. Something organic and sour that made my stomach turn. I went to close the windows, and that's when the first real sound made my blood run cold. It wasn't music skipping or chairs tilting. It was a scraping sound, soft and deliberate, like fingernails against the wooden floor just beyond the line of sight. I spun around, and for a heartbeat, I could have sworn I saw a figure crouched in the shadow near the far wall. My brain wanted to rationalize it. A party trick, someone hiding, a friend playing a joke. But it didn't move like a person, not exactly. It was too still, and then it disappeared. Just gone. I swear I didn't blink. I stumbled toward the door, fumbling with the lock, and as I reached the handle, the whispers shifted almost like laughter, or maybe words. I couldn't make them out. It felt like the air itself was pressing in, thick and damp, moving around me. The party was quiet now, everyone outside or in other rooms, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave. I could feel a presence behind me, just beyond the reach of the lamplight. I didn't dare look. I opened the door, stepped outside into the cold, and for the first time since arriving, the world seemed silent in comparison. I ran down the driveway, the gravel crunching beneath my shoes, trying to tell myself I'd been imagining it all. But even in the darkness of the night, I could see movement in the shadows cast by the trees, brief flickers that shouldn't have been there. Something, someone, had been inside, among us, unseen, and now it was watching me leave. By the time I got to my car, I was shaking, hands trembling as I fumbled for the keys. I didn't look back until I was halfway down the street, and even then, I couldn't see anyone. Yet the sense of being observed didn't fade. The next day, I went back to the house to retrieve my things. My coat and gloves were never found, and my phone was gone, wiped clean of any contacts or messages. I asked the host if anyone had noticed strange things, but they laughed nervously, saying only that the party had been a mess and things often got misplaced. But I know what I felt. The whispered voices, the shapes in the corners, the cold patches near the windows. They weren't my imagination. I still feel it sometimes. Late at night, a prickling sensation along my spine, a soft rustling outside my window that makes me freeze in place. I know what I saw that night, even if no one else does. Someone or something was there, moving quietly among us, unseen, and I'm convinced it's still out there, waiting. I can't shake it. Even now, years later, I sometimes wake up thinking I hear soft scraping or the faintest whisper just beyond my bedroom door. I've moved, changed phones, changed routines, but the memory clings. I wonder if it was just a feral person. One of those legends my grandparents used to whisper about. The lost souls living in the hollows of the mountains, unseen but watching, surviving in the shadows. Or maybe it was something else, something I can't name, something that doesn't need a reason. What terrifies me most is not knowing. Not knowing if it was real or if it could return the next time a party grows loud and careless. I remember the exact feeling as I left that night, the chill crawling down my back, the hair on my arms rising, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. And though the street lights lit the road ahead, nothing could erase the impression that someone had been there all along, quietly observing, slipping in and out of sight, leaving only the faintest traces behind. That lingering presence never left me, never will. Every time I close my eyes, I see the empty space where it stood, just at the edge of vision, waiting, patient, silent. The memory gnaws at me, a slow, creeping terror that no explanation can touch. And it has changed the way I see the world ever since. The house, the shadows, the whispers, they were real. And I know deep down that whatever it was, it's still out there, watching, unseen, just beyond the edge of the night. The sense of dread didn't vanish when I left the house. It followed me for days, a subtle pressure at the back of my mind. I stopped trusting silence, stopped being alone in empty rooms. Friends asked why I seemed distant, why I jumped at small sounds, why I refused to answer the phone when it rang late at night. I never told them. How do you explain being watched by something you cannot see, by a presence that leaves no trace other than a feeling? a gnawing, creeping certainty that you are not alone. Sometimes I think the worst part isn't that it was there. The worst part is that I don't know what it wanted or why it lingered. Was it curiosity, hunger, malice? I'll never know. All I know is the sense that someone or something moves in the spaces we overlook, slipping in when we think we're safe, observing quietly and disappearing without a trace. And that thought stays with me, long after the party ended, long after the lights came back on, long after I swore I'd never enter a crowded room alone again. It left me with only one certainty. There are places, even in familiar towns, even among friends, where you are never truly seen and never truly safe. I remember the night like it was yesterday, though I can't say I understand any of it. It was a late December evening, and we had gathered at my friend's cabin in the hollows near the edge of the Appalachian Ridge. The air had that bitter sting that bites through even the thickest coat, and snow had been falling steadily, muffling the usual forest sounds. The fire crackled low in the stone fireplace, and we all huddled close, trading stories and passing around bottles of whiskey and mugs of coffee. That's when I noticed her. She was just there. One moment I was leaning back in my chair, trying to loosen the stiffness from the drive up the ridge, and the next, she was seated across from me. I don't recall anyone announcing her, and I can swear nobody else had moved. Her hair was dark, hanging straight around her shoulders, and her eyes, well, they had this strange, unfocused quality, like she was both here and somewhere else entirely. She didn't speak, and for a long while I didn't even realize she was staring. She just smiled faintly whenever someone passed by, not in a welcoming way, but in a way that made the skin along your spine tingle. At first, we thought maybe she was a friend of someone who had come in late, a cousin, or someone who had slipped our memory. But nobody claimed her. Nobody had even seen her arrive. She just existed in the room. And then the little things started. At first, it was subtle. Someone would set a glass down only to return and find it half empty. Or a plate of snacks would be diminished, even though nobody had eaten near her. My friend Carl swore he saw her standing in the hallway, just staring at the staircase as if waiting for something for hours. He said he didn't want to disturb her, but something in the way she moved, or didn't move, made him shiver. I tried to talk to her quietly at first, asking if she needed anything, offering a drink, but she never responded. Her eyes would flicker briefly toward me, and that faint smile would return, almost hypnotic, like she was observing more than just our bodies, like she was cataloging our lives in silence. The air grew heavier around her, and I started noticing how conversations would drift into awkward pauses when she was near, as if her presence sucked the warmth out of the room. The oddest part was how time seemed different around her. Clocks lost meaning. One moment the firelight would be casting long shadows across the walls, and the next it seemed deep into the night, though the rest of the house felt frozen. I tried to make sense of it. Maybe we had all been drinking too much. Maybe the long drive and the cold were playing tricks on our minds. But when someone would check the clock, it was always nearing 3 in the morning. And then she was gone. I can't describe the way it happened. One second she was sitting in the corner, smiling that same faint smile, and the next the chair was empty. Nobody saw her leave. Nobody opened the door. Nobody heard footsteps. Carl muttered something about the way she just faded, like she had never been there at all, but I didn't want to admit how terrified I felt. I went to check the security cameras the next day. Nothing. Every angle, every hallway, every doorway, and she wasn't on a single frame. It was as if she had never existed. The footage of the living room shows chairs rocking slightly, mugs placed differently than we remembered, but the woman herself never appeared. I tried to shrug it off, tell myself it was stress, exhaustion, or some shared hallucination. But the more I thought about it, the less it made sense. Others began mentioning strange things too. My friend Lisa said she had felt cold drafts around her, but the windows were all shut. She swore she saw the faint impression of someone sitting on the couch long after everyone had left the room. Another friend mentioned waking up at exactly 3 a.m. to a faint humming that didn't belong to anyone in the cabin. None of it made sense. There was no sound in the video, no disturbance in the footage, and yet we all remembered feeling it, seeing it. I can't explain what she was, and I don't know if anyone else ever will. It wasn't frightening in a traditional sense. There were no screams, no attacks, but it was the way she existed just beyond understanding. You could feel her presence pressing against the edges of your thoughts, like the human mind shouldn't be able to comprehend whatever she carried with her. There was a hunger there, I think, not for food or drink, but for attention, for awareness. She seemed to feed on the simple act of being noticed, yet she offered nothing in return. I started noticing other things after that night. Shadows that lingered too long in corners, the way the hallway felt tighter, the forest outside quieter than it should be. And always, at 3 a.m., there's that hollow emptiness where she should be, and yet isn't. I've returned to that cabin a few times since, tried to rationalize the experience. I even invited a few friends back, hoping it was some kind of fluke. Nothing. But once, near the edge of the porch, I thought I saw her silhouette standing in the snow, watching the house. When I blinked, she was gone. No footprints in the snow, nothing to prove she had been there. I keep thinking about how she blended in so easily, like she had always been part of the group, part of the fabric of that night. Nobody remembered inviting her, and yet we all treated her as normal, until the little things reminded us she wasn't. She didn't speak, didn't interact in the usual ways, and yet her presence warped the night, nudged it into something fragile and terrifying. Sometimes I wonder if she only appears in those moments when the world is still enough to notice her, when human consciousness is relaxed and distracted. Maybe she's been there in the hollows for centuries, drifting from cabin to cabin, watching and waiting for the warmth of a fire and the company of humans. Maybe she disappears every morning, leaving no trace, no evidence, and then slips into another gathering somewhere else. I've tried to rationalize her away, but the memory sticks. I can feel her even now when I think about it. The cold brush of her attention, the weight of those eyes that never meet yours directly, the faint smile that says nothing but knows everything. I still don't know her name. I don't know where she came from or why she chooses these quiet, snow-covered hollows for her visits. And I think that's what unsettles me the most. She didn't need to speak to terrify us. She just existed, and that was enough. The strange, impossible little disappearances, the half-empty mugs, the snacks vanishing, the hours spent staring at walls and staircases. They all make me question reality now. The memory of her presence gnaws at the edges of my mind. I sometimes hear people laugh about haunted cabins or ghost stories in the Appalachians, but this was different. It wasn't a story to scare tourists. It was real, at least as real as anything can be when it leaves no trace. You can't photograph her, you can't record her, you can't even remember her arriving or leaving. She simply slips through the edges of our perception, blending in, feeding on the subtle changes she creates and vanishing without a trace. And I fear that if I tell this story, I'll start noticing her again, her figure in the corner of my vision, her faint, knowing smile when I pass a mirror. Maybe she isn't bound by cabins, by hollows, by winter nights. Maybe she drifts wherever there are people, quiet enough to be ignored, persistent enough to be felt. I've tried to convince myself that seeing her once was enough, that maybe I dreamed the whole thing, but the empty feeling at 3 a.m., The way ordinary objects shift inexplicably when I'm alone in my own home tells me otherwise. She's still out there, still waiting for the quiet, the warmth, the human distractions that let her exist among us unnoticed. And somehow that terrifies me more than anything I could have imagined. I remember that night as if it were a fragment of someone else's dream, something I keep replaying in the dark, wondering if anyone else would call it what it really was. We had rented a small cabin tucked away in the hollows of the Appalachians, one of those old, weathered places that look harmless enough in the daylight, but seem to settle into your bones once the sun dips below the ridges. It was New Year's Eve, and the cabin was alive with laughter, music, and the smell of burning firewood mixed with cheap champagne. At some point, I had stepped away from the crowd, craving nothing more than a handful of chips and maybe a soda. The path from the living room to the kitchen was short, but something in the way the shadows clung to the corners made the walk feel longer than it should have. I pushed open the kitchen door and froze mid-step. There was a sound I didn't expect. Soft, high-pitched laughter, like someone had pressed their mouth against the walls and let it echo endlessly. My first thought was that it had to be one of my friends trying to scare me. They were always doing that. But when I called out their names, the laughter stopped. For a second, the kitchen was silent except for the faint hum of the fridge. I laughed nervously to myself, shaking my head and muttering about champagne-induced paranoia. That's when I noticed the glasses. One of them trembled on the counter as if it were caught in a tremor, and a chair scraped slowly across the floor, not enough to make a loud noise, just enough to send the hairs on my neck standing on end. I took a step closer, my hand brushing against the counter, and the laughter returned. It was closer this time, like it was slipping from somewhere just behind me, bouncing off the walls in a way that no person could mimic. I spun around, but the room was empty. My pulse was racing, but I tried to laugh it off, telling myself it was the echo of our party, a trick of the acoustics in the old cabin. Still, there was a weight to the air that didn't belong there. It pressed down on my shoulders, nudging me, watching. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Too much champagne, too much celebration, a long day driving up the mountains. But my instincts screamed otherwise. Every time I called out, the laughter paused, almost in mockery, and then it would start again, slower this time, drawn out like it was savoring my fear. I remember gripping the edge of the counter, feeling the wood rough under my palms, wishing someone would just step in and say, "It's me, you idiot, stop being dramatic." But no one did. It was just me, the echoing laughter, and the uneasy sensation that something was moving around me, always out of sight. Glasses rattled again, faint but distinct, and the chair slid once more, scraping across the floor as if some invisible guest were joining the party alone. I called out louder, almost shouting now, my voice cracking, but it didn't help. The laughter seemed to dance around my words, sometimes stopping for a breath, sometimes chuckling in rhythm with my heartbeat. My stomach dropped as the sound took on a tone that felt almost playful, like it was aware I could hear it, like it had been waiting for someone to wander into the kitchen alone. I moved cautiously toward the living room, hoping to find my friends there and end this ridiculous prank. But the moment I stepped out of the kitchen, it was gone, fading as if it had never been there at all. I laughed nervously again, telling myself I was imagining it, the nerves of the drive, the isolation of the cabin, and the lingering fog outside the windows. Later that night, after midnight and the fireworks had died down, my friends and I gathered around the small wood stove, exhausted from celebrating. I tried to push the memory out of my mind, chalk it up to a lapse in my own senses, but then one of my friends spoke up, and my stomach dropped. They described the same laughter, the way it seemed to move just out of reach, the rattling of the glasses, the chair that scraped slowly across the floor. Everyone had heard it at different times throughout the night, but no one could explain it. Our laughter at first was nervous, then uneasy, and finally silent, because admitting what we'd all experienced left no room for jokes. We didn't leave the cabin that night, at least not immediately. There was a strange compulsion to stay, like running outside would somehow let it follow us. I remember lying awake in my sleeping bag, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet thrum of the forest outside. Every now and then, faintly, I thought I heard it again, a soft, distant giggle, or maybe it was the wind through the trees. I couldn't be sure. The cabin had taken on a different character in those hours, one of watchfulness and patience. It wasn't dangerous in a traditional sense, but it felt alive, and it knew we were aware of it. That was the part that got under my skin, the certainty that whatever had been laughing at us had been aware of every movement, every glance, every whisper of fear. Over the years, I've told the story to a few people, and it always draws a laugh or a shake of the head. Old cabins, creaky floors, they say. Maybe it was. But I can still hear that laughter in my mind, the way it would pause just when I thought I could confront it, the way it lingered in the empty corners. And every time I drive past the Appalachians or see a cabin tucked deep in the trees, I remember that night, and a cold, sinking certainty washes over me. Whatever it wasn't human. Not entirely. Not bound by the rules of living or dying. It didn't need to move or speak in a way I could understand. It just existed. And it had been there, watching us, enjoying us, waiting for the right moment to remind us that we weren't alone. I still wonder about the sound of that laughter sometimes. When I'm home alone, or in a crowded room that feels oddly quiet. There's a particular cadence to it I can't describe, the sort that lingers long after the last echo has faded. I've tried to rationalize it all. Nerves, excitement, mishearing one another, even some trick of the cabin's architecture. But the truth settles heavier than any of that. I can feel it when I think about it. The soft, deliberate way it moved across the room, the way it waited for my reaction, the way it didn't belong to anyone or anything I'd ever met. When people ask if I believe in ghosts or spirits, I don't know what to say. I only know what I felt that night. An unmistakable presence that was patient, almost intelligent, and terrifying in its simplicity. It didn't chase us. It didn't scream. It didn't make itself known in some dramatic way. It just existed, and it laughed. Softly, endlessly. And even now, years later, I can close my eyes and hear it again, echoing through a kitchen that's no longer mine, through a cabin long abandoned, through the hollows and ridges of the Appalachians where we once thought we were safe. I can't explain why it laughed or what it wanted. Maybe it was curious. Maybe it was amused. Maybe it's still waiting for someone else to wander in alone, drawn by hunger, boredom, or foolish bravery. But I do know this. The sound of that laughter has a weight to it, a subtle pull on your mind that you can't shake. And if you ever hear it, even faintly, in a room that seems empty, don't assume it's your imagination. Listen closely, because if you do, you might understand the same truth I did that night, that some things exist in the Appalachian hollows that don't need bodies to haunt you. They only need attention, and they will take it, slowly, patiently, and with a quiet, inescapable joy. I remember that night with a kind of weight that never really leaves you, the kind that settles into your chest and makes your skin feel too tight. It was a small New Year's Eve, gathering in a cabin tucked against the slope of the Blue Ridge, the kind of place where the roads twist so sharply you feel like the mountains are swallowing you whole before you even reach the driveway. The house itself was old, wood darkened by decades of smoke and rain, and the windows rattled in the winter wind. Inside, the air smelled of pine-scented candles and cheap bourbon, and the laughter of my friends echoed against the beams, loose and hollow. Everything seemed normal at first, people mingling, Glasses clinking, the fireplace casting shadows that danced along the walls. But there was a quietness to the edges of the room, like the shadows themselves were holding their breath. I noticed it first as a subtle shift in the crowd, almost imperceptible. Small groups of people would drift toward the doors, their movements casual, unremarkable, but they never came back. One by one, familiar faces vanished without a word. At first, I chalked it up to people stepping out for fresh air, smoke, or a phone call. But as the minutes passed and the countdown drew closer, it became impossible to ignore. I'd turn to call someone's name and there would be no one there. The chair they had been leaning against was empty, as though it had been waiting for them to return, but now waited in vain. Panic didn't hit me at first. I told myself they'd gone outside, maybe exploring the grounds, maybe lost in conversation somewhere else in the house. But there was a stillness beyond the walls, a silence that didn't belong to a lively New Year's party. By the time the clock was 5 minutes from midnight, only a handful of us were left inside. I remember the way my heart thumped so hard it almost drowned out the sound of the wind rattling the shutters. I stepped into the hallway, calling names, peering into empty rooms that should have been filled with bodies, but there was nothing. Not a single person, not a trace of movement, not even the low murmur of conversation. It felt like a dream you can't wake from, like reality had cracked and some of my friends had fallen through. I went outside into the snow-dusted yard, and the streets were empty too. The mountains loomed around us, black and silent, and the wind carried a hollow whistle that sounded eerily like a laugh or a warning. I walked down the lane, expecting maybe to see headlights or someone wandering back, but the road was deserted, the footprints of those who had vanished already gone, erased by the wind or by something else I couldn't name. Inside, the few remaining people were staring at the empty chairs and silent rooms with the same frozen dread I felt clawing at my ribs. None of us spoke. Not really. The warmth of the fire did nothing to soften the chill that had wrapped around us. And that's when I realized something far more disturbing than empty seats. No one else seemed to notice. No one seemed worried. A girl I'd known since high school laughed at the fireplace as if nothing had changed. A couple in the corner sipped their drinks, unaware of the absence of their friends. It was as though the people who had vanished had been erased not just from sight, but from memory, and the remaining guests accepted it without question. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end, trying to reconcile the contradiction of seeing and remembering what no one else acknowledged. I don't know how long we stayed there, frozen between disbelief and fear. The clock ticked closer to midnight, and I kept expecting some kind of explanation, a normal announcement, a joke someone had planned, anything to cut through the dread. But when the hour finally struck, the final chime echoing against the walls, there was no celebration, no cheer, just a suffocating silence. I remember the last look I gave the empty hall, the way the shadows pooled in the corners like waiting things, and I thought, maybe if I stepped outside, if I followed the vanishing path, I'd understand. But the moment I opened the door, the cold air cut into me like a blade, and the street was nothing but snow and darkness. There was no path to follow, no hint of anyone who had been here minutes before. Weeks later, when I tried to talk about it, friends insisted the party had been normal. They told me I was imagining things, that everyone had left at the usual time, that nothing unusual had happened. But I remembered every disappearing face, every sudden absence, every empty chair. I remembered the hollow echo of a laugh carried by the wind, and the way the mountains pressed against the cabin, suffocating, indifferent. Sometimes, late at night, I replay the memory in my head, picturing the exact way people faded, how the walls seemed to absorb their presence, how nothing outside gave any clue that anyone had been there. And I realize, with a cold knot of fear, that it wasn't just them who disappeared. It was the world around them that refused to remember. I've thought about going back to the cabin, to see if retracing the steps would make any sense. But there's a fear there that's not rational. I think about the footprints erased by wind and snow, the way the shadows lingered too long, the quiet that waited at the edges of the firelight. Even now, when I pass through crowded streets or listen to laughter from a distance, I feel that same creeping unease, the sense that something can be here one moment and gone the next, leaving nothing but disbelief in its wake. And it's not just the people who vanished that haunt me. It's the acceptance of everyone else. The way their memory could be so easily rewritten, so casually dismissed, as if reality itself were willing to let them go. Sometimes I wake in the middle of the night and can't remember if I dreamt it all, or if I really saw my friends fade into the walls. But I know the weight in my chest, the hollow echo of empty rooms, and the way the wind whistles through the mountains, carrying with it a memory of things that shouldn't exist. I remember the smallest details, the ones no one else could, like the smudge of a sleeve on a chair, the faint scent of someone who had vanished, the way a glass tipped slightly as though held by an invisible hand. And when I try to tell someone, when I try to explain the faces that disappeared, the empty streets, the erasure that no one else sees, I am met with incredulity, laughter, or the polite nods of people who can't or won't remember. The fear isn't in what happened in that cabin. It's in knowing that it could happen anywhere, that someone you know could vanish and the world wouldn't notice, that you could see it happen, remember it vividly, and be left alone with the evidence of your own eyes while everyone else insists that nothing ever changed. That's the part that sticks with me, the part I can't shake, the absolute certainty that the people I loved simply ceased to exist in the world's memory, and the cruel, quiet realization that the world doesn't care. Even now, years later, when I pass the mountains in the distance or hear the faint scrape of footsteps in the snow, I feel the pull of that night. I remember faces in the corners of rooms that were never there the next moment. I remember walking down empty streets, calling names that would never answer. I remember the silence, the acceptance of everyone else, and the strange, lingering thought that the cabin isn't just a place. It's a threshold, and the world is far thinner than it should be, and sometimes people slip through and no one notices. I don't tell people anymore. I don't try to explain the vanishing, but every year, when the air turns cold and the wind rattles the windows, I remember that New Year's Eve. I remember counting down with my friends, watching them fade, and standing alone as the clock struck midnight. And I remember the quiet, all-consuming dread, the impossible emptiness, and the terrifying understanding that some things in this world are meant to be forgotten, even if you never will. The cabin sat a few miles off the nearest paved road, tucked into a fold of the Appalachian foothills where cell service flickered in and out like a bad habit. It belonged to my cousin Evan, a squat cedar place his granddad built back when people still trusted trees to keep secrets. We were there for a late fall party, nothing wild by city standards, just friends, beer, a bonfire out back, and music humming through a pair of old speakers that buzzed whenever someone cranked the volume too high. The woods pressed in tight around the clearing, black and patient, the kind of darkness that doesn't feel empty so much as occupied. By midnight, the air inside was thick with sweat, smoke, and cheap liquor. Someone had dragged the couch closer to the fireplace, and people were sprawled across it like castaways. Laughter rolled through the room in uneven waves. Outside, the wind worried at the trees, branches rubbing together with a dry, whispering sound that kept slipping into my awareness, no matter how much I tried to ignore it. I remember thinking the forest sounded restless, like it didn't approve of us being there. I was leaning against the kitchen counter when my phone buzzed in my pocket. That alone felt strange. Service was usually dead out there. I pulled it out, expecting maybe a delayed text from earlier in the day. Instead, it was an incoming call from a number I didn't recognize. No name, just digits. I hesitated, thumb hovering, then answered more out of curiosity than anything else. "Hello?" I said. There was no reply, just a faint, hollow sound, like breathing too far away from the microphone. I waited a few seconds, listening past the music and chatter around me, then said hello again. Still nothing. I hung up, feeling mildly annoyed, and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Less than a minute later, it buzzed again. This time it was a text from the same number. "She's walking past the couch now." I frowned and glanced up, half expecting someone to be staring at me with a grin. Instead, I saw exactly what the message described. Megan, one of Evan's friends, weaving past the couch toward the bathroom, holding the wall for balance. The timing was perfect. Too perfect. I felt a quick, sharp chill run up my spine. The kind you get when you realize someone just said your name behind you. I typed back, "Who is this?" No response. Another buzz. Someone just dropped a glass. Almost on cue, there was the sound of shattering near the sink, followed by a groan and a round of laughter as Evan swore and bent to clean it up. A few people clapped. Nobody noticed me standing there, suddenly very still, my phone heavy in my hand. I scanned the room, looking for anyone paying me unusual attention. Everyone was wrapped up in their own little worlds, talking, flirting, dancing badly to an old country song. No one had a phone out. No one was watching me. I tried calling the number back. It rang once, then went straight to a disconnected message. No voicemail, just dead. The next text came through while I was still staring at the screen. "You keep checking your phone." My heart started to thump harder, loud enough that I was sure someone nearby could hear it. I hadn't realized how often I'd been glancing down, how obvious my anxiety must have been. I moved toward the hallway, needing a quieter space, but another message stopped me mid-step. "Don't go back there." I froze. The hallway led to the bedrooms and the back door, both places that suddenly felt very far away. I stood where I was, the kitchen light buzzing overhead, and tried to steady my breathing. I told myself it had to be a prank, someone messing with me. Maybe they had a clear view from outside. Maybe there was another phone hidden somewhere. But the windows were dark mirrors, reflecting only the inside of the cabin. Beyond the glass was nothing but trees. The texts kept coming, spaced just far enough apart to let dread bloom in the gaps. "He's lighting another cigarette." Across the room, Travis flicked his lighter, the flame briefly illuminating his face. "The music's too loud." Someone reached for the speaker and turned it down a notch. Each message chipped away at my sense of safety. The idea that someone could see everything, tiny, meaningless details, made my skin crawl. It wasn't just that they knew what was happening. It was that they wanted me to know they knew. I typed again, fingers shaking now. "Where are you?" The reply came slower this time. "Closer than you think." That was when I noticed the smell. At first, I thought it was the fire, burnt wood and old ash. But there was something else threaded through it. Damp earth, rotting leaves, the smell you get when you turn over a log that's been sitting too long. I looked toward the back door. It was shut, but a thin line of darkness showed beneath it, wider than I remembered. Another buzz. "The door doesn't close right." I felt a tightness in my chest, like I couldn't quite get a full breath. I walked over and pressed my foot against the door, nudging it until it clicked into place. The smell faded a little, but not completely. No one else seemed to notice. I tried once more to call the number, disconnected again. "Stop that," the next text said. "It's rude." My hands were cold now, fingers numb. I moved closer to the fireplace, drawn to the light and heat, and sat on the edge of the couch. I didn't tell anyone what was happening. I don't know why. Maybe part of me was afraid that saying it out loud would make it real. Or worse, that they'd laugh and confirm it was all in my head. The messages slowed as the night wore on. People started drifting out to their cars or crashing in spare rooms. The bonfire died down to glowing coals. Eventually, it was just a handful of us left. The cabin quieter, the woods louder. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump. The last text came sometime after 2 when I was half asleep, phone resting on my chest. You should lock the door when everyone leaves. I bolted upright, heart racing. I looked around the room. Evan was snoring softly in a chair. The fire had burned down to embers. The windows were black. I got up and checked the door, twisting the lock until it wouldn't turn anymore. I checked the windows too, pressing on them to make sure they were secure. When I sat back down, my phone buzzed one final time. Too late. I didn't sleep after that. I sat there until dawn, watching the pale light creep through the trees, listening to the forest settle. When the others woke up, groggy and hungover, I told them I hadn't slept well. I didn't mention the messages. By the time I had service again, driving down the mountain, the number was gone from my call log, like it had never existed. I deleted the texts that afternoon, every last one. I told myself it was better not to keep them, that holding on to proof wouldn't change anything. But even now, years later, I think about that night whenever my phone buzzes unexpectedly. I think about how easily someone or something can be close without being seen. Sometimes, when I'm alone in a room full of noise, I still get the feeling that I'm being quietly narrated. My movements observed by a presence just outside the light, waiting for the moment when I forget to lock the door.